When I was at school, probably 15, 16, a relative of mine was the bass player in a band called Judas Priest, the very early Judas Priest, before Rob Alford and all the other guys now. He didn't live very far from me, so I used to visit quite often, meet the guys, and then I started to go on a few concerts with them, just small shows in clubs and bars, basically to lift the equipment around. But the whole time I had an interest in the more technical aspects of the industry. And when I left school, I went to work for a steel company called British Steel Corporation as an electronics engineer. Whilst I was doing my apprenticeship, I always kept doing small concerts with the small bands. And of course, the more qualified that I got in the electrical world, the more useful I was to the bands because I could fix the equipment. But I always had a leaning towards sound, even though I did lights as well. It just was really a natural progression, doing more concerts. And then I started working for a local band that had its own PA. I met a guy who was doing lights at the same time, and we'd both turn up to do the same gigs. And he said, "Do you want to start a lighting company?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." But my interest was always in sound. So in the way of doing lights and meeting all the other sound companies, I met bigger sound companies, and I started to do casual work for a company called TechServe. And TechServe was owned by a guy called Bob Doyle. Bob Doyle later became one of the owners of Digico and started that company, but he was also the managing director of Midas Consoles. Well, he was asked by a manager called Peter Mensch, who managed Def Leppard at the time, whether he had one of his engineers that could turn up at Birmingham University and mix a new band they just signed called the Armory Show. Now, the Armory Show was ex-Susie and the Banshees and the Skids and Machine and all these other sort of bands around big country time. And I went and did that concert. And after that concert, I was about to go home. And the manager guy goes, "Well, are you ready?" And I'm like, "Ready for what?" And he goes, "Well, are you ready to go on tour?" And I'm like, "No. Well, I got my motorcycle outside and I don't have any clothes or anything." And he was like, "Well, you better go and get rid of your motorcycle and get some clothes and come back." I worked for the Armory Show for probably 18 months, 2 years, and Peter Mensch liked me and liked what I did. And he said, "We've just signed a new band called Metallica." I was like, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's heavy metal." "Well, what's heavy metal?" And he goes, "Well, you'll find out if you do it." Because obviously it had only been rock bands up until that point. You know, heavy metal was very new then. So I said, "Yeah, okay." We started November 1984, and that started in England. They rehearsed here, and then we went out on tour in Europe. Just me and one other guy with a TechServe PA. We did really well. I could sort of see that the band, it was something special, because it was one of the very few times I'd worked for a band that we would turn up at the concerts to load the equipment in, and there would be fans outside already in the afternoon. Now, how many times do you see a line forming round the venue for a band that's playing the local bar? It made me think, oh, okay, these guys are quite popular. So we did the tour, and then got on great with the band because they're really nice guys. And they said, "Well, do you want to be our engineer?" And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean?" Because I'd never really been a band engineer. I'd always been a system company engineer. So they said to me, "You want to be our engineer?" I agreed, yes, okay. And they said, "Well, we start," I think it was in Boston. Now, I had been to America before because I also used to do a lot of punk bands. I did GBH, Exploited, Discharge, and English Dogs. So I did a lot of the punk. And of course, Metallica really liked the punk. So the fact I did those guys kind of put me in a good position for doing Metallica. So that's really how I got started as an individual. I just paid attention and learnt as much electrical information as I could, because that's obviously very useful for what we do, and went from there. I've always tried to keep up with technology. I wasn't a person who sort of went, okay, that's the way this sounds, this is how it's going to stay. We've always tried to move on. You know, the band and myself, we've always tried to make things even better all the time. it's a constant learning experience. You never know everything, and something always new comes along, and it's more now I can embrace the new things and learn from them, as opposed to them being scary like they were in the beginning. You know, the first time, you know, you go from doing a venue that holds 2,000 people, and then all of a sudden you're in arenas doing 20,000, and then you're outside doing festivals that can be 80, 100,000, and then the one-off that we did in Moscow, which was supposed to be 1 million people. And I mean, each one of those is a little nerve-wracking. And even now, I'd be lying if I said that when I walk out into a full stadium, that there's not a little bit of apprehension about it. You still feel it. Through all the early years, of course, I was still working out what the band should sound like, because we were formulating the sound of Metallica. You know, that they did what they felt musically and just played, and at the same time I'm trying to work out, well, what should this sound like? It's more deliberate now. You know, if we talk about something now, we're more deliberate about it. In those early days when we were young, we were just doing what we felt. You know, when you've got some guy playing double kick drums, you know, if you did what it said in the name, bass drum, and you just had bass and no treble, then you just have a big rumble sound. And then we started to learn that we needed to add high end to the kick drums to make each time you hit the different ones, you could hear them both working. You know, it didn't become just a droning bass sound. Most bands don't really know what the overall sound should be, I don't think. I mean, the studio albums are one thing, and what you can actually reproduce live is another. Capturing the attitude of a band live is so different to the studio vibe. I've just tried things. Obviously, many years changing microphones, changing how many mics are on the snare drum from 1 to 2 to 3. You know, how many mics in the kick drums. All that changed. Everything changed out of necessity, out of the fact that there was a problem with that particular input. It needs to be better. How can I make it better? And we've just done that with Metallica for 30 years. And we still do that. I still change things even now. I've always maintained that I am an employee of the band. You know, a lot of people go, oh, you're the fifth member and all this. No, it's their project. I work for them. They pay me wages, and I treat them with the respect that deserves. They're my friends. Of course, they're my friends. I've known them for 30 years. You know, in the very early days when we used to go on tour, like for the Black Album was 3 years. I don't think we did a tour shorter than 18 months. It never works, the really close friendship thing with people you work for. I see so many people try to get close to the band because they think that that's what they want to do. They want to be the friends, but you can't do that. You can't force that to happen. You're either friends with somebody or you're not. You're not going to be an engineer, that kind of thing. And you know, we all answer to the fans, including the band. These people come to our concerts and they spend an awful lot of money on those tickets. They don't get any cheaper because it's so expensive to move equipment around the world, and all the people and everything we need. These people have worked really hard to come to that concert, and I want them to have the best possible experience. I want them to hear Metallica and enjoy it and be moved by it. You know, not just some throwaway concert. We've never done that, and the band are not of that attitude either. They want every concert to be absolutely right. No, I'm not a big fan of over manipulating the sounds. The sound should be good from the source. If you've got the right microphone in the right place on a certain instrument, you should be kind of getting close. Even with flat EQ, it should be good. Normally go along all the high pass filters of the console to clean up all the low end before I even start. You know, what's the point of having cymbals go all the way down? They're obviously going to not work in the lower frequencies, so you high pass them. And I can do that without even hearing them. So, you know, you may be high passing at 300 to 400 hertz, maybe all the way round on the high pass knob. I know the hi-hat isn't going to want all the low end into it because that'll be going bump, bump, bump every time the guy bangs his foot on the riser. So you can do that kind of thing. Guitars, I know I'm going to go all the way down either. They're probably going to be high-passed around 100, 150, somewhere there, same as vocals, the kick drum. I use two microphones. I use 91 for the high frequency and I use a D6 for the low frequencies. I know that the D6 is going to have a cut in the EQ somewhere, anywhere from 130 to 200 hertz, depending on the kick drum. So I'm always ready with a filter there to take out those frequencies. And of course, I can't tell how much of those frequencies I'm going to take out until I actually hear it. But I do know there will be something there. I know that there's going to have to be a shelf in the high end on the kick drum, probably starting 5 or 6K, quite a lot of it. Then depending on the speaker system and all the rest of it, it may need another high frequency boost in around the 3 to 5K region. Might need a little peak putting in there just to give it the attack. But that's the kind of thing you do when you're actually listening to it. But I know the numbers of what need to happen, basically. Gating, I mean, it's to clean up the sound. When you have a band that's very noisy on stage, you have to employ a lot of gating. So yes, absolutely, lots of gating. I can honestly say that the only thing not gated on the drum kit are the overheads and the hi-hat. Of course, you have to learn to use gates. Attack times, for percussive instruments need to be very fast. Decay times, they need to be varied depending on how much you want the tom-tom to go on for, or how long do you want the kick drum to sound for. Does it want to be a big thud that rings on, or does it want to be a short, powerful punch? So no, absolutely, I use gates to shape sounds. And the same with compression. But compression tends to be more probably in the form of a limiter than actual compression. Okay, I can compress to make an acoustic guitar, keep the notes all there, and the same for bass guitar. But for vocal and stuff like that, I'm not trying to bring out the breath sounds of a voice. I'm literally trying to stop it getting too loud in the PA. If you start introducing running vocals in constant compression in order to level them like you would in a studio, you're going to lift up the noise floor on stage, which is going to bring up a lot of background noise. Now, I have normally 12 vocal mics all sitting there for one guy to sing into, pretty much. So they're all over the stage, and some of them are in front of the PA. So I cannot run those vocals in constant compression, because as soon as he walked away from them and the compression lifted off, you would just be adding all the background noise. I tend to use it more for the fact that if he shouts or gets loud, it will hold it back in the PA so it doesn't get too loud. And then, of course, when he sings normally, it's not running in compression. I don't use plugins because the Midas platform doesn't support any external plugins like Waves. I mean, I know the guys from Waves. I have used their stuff, and it's fantastic, some of it. But of course, Midas does its own plugins, if you like. So they're building a bigger library of that all the time. But no, I'm not a big fan of over manipulating the sounds. The sound should be good from the source. I'm a little bit more of a puritan. I want to hear the microphones and speakers and amplifiers. I don't use samples, I don't want to sample kick drum. I don't want to sample snares and toms. I don't do any of that because I want the pure sound. When you start putting in all these things that crunch, squash, chop it up, do whatever to it, I think you start stepping a little bit too far away from the original. With the fractals, I was a little bit strange about the fractal guitar sounds because I was always about the microphones and speakers and amplifiers. And then to suddenly go to this emulated guitar sound didn't seem right. Fortunately, it's really good, so it's emulated the guitar sounds and the amplifiers and all the rest of it really well. So I think That's a new place that I'm going. I'm learning more that you can do this. But I like real sounds with microphones. It's all changing constantly, actually, because there's new systems coming along all the time. At the moment, I'm really into the Maya Leo system. Very easy to use, really precise, and incredibly powerful. If not that, I like the L-Acoustic K1 system. That's a great sounding system with the SB28 subs. They sound fantastic too. The D&B system, the J series, that also sounds really good. Slightly in a different way, but nice all the same. So there's many different systems that all have different things going for them. But I think my favourite at the moment is the Leo system. I like to use a DN6000 Clark Technic spectrum analyzer, which gives me a visual picture. It's one of the very old ones. It's an old unit compared to the new ones. It's a reinforcement for what I think using my ears. So when I've looked at the screen when it's been a really good show, I can see the picture that sound makes. So there's a target right there. If I see this picture on the analyzer, then I'm sort of getting close to where I need to be. I listen to it and I think, yeah, that sounds like Metallica. That's how it should be. And then I look at the analyzer and I'm like, yeah, that's a confirmation that that's the picture that I see when it sounds good. It's not that finite, though. It's not the kind of thing where you can go, oh, look, just that one frequency. No, it's not like that. I switch the averaging speed on that. I might average it for a minute or 2 minutes, and you can see frequencies that build up at certain places, because sometimes you'll be listening to a mix and you'll be like, there's something not quite right about that, but you can't put your finger on what it is. It's like, and it's normally a summation of frequencies in guitars and and that kind of thing, maybe in the vocal too, where the PA may have a little bit too much 500 hertz or a little much 250 hertz, and it's kind of hard to tell which input has that on, and you're like, well, is it adding individual input or is it like the overall PA? Well, if you switch an analyzer to slow average, first of all, it starts to show that frequency that's sticking out all the time. If I see that repeatedly, I'll go to the system EQ and I'll just take out a little bit of that frequency and listen and think, yeah, well, that's what I was after. It's the sound of Midas. The XL4 was a fantastic console, the best analog console out of all of them, for many reasons. The mic pre's just have the right attitude about them, from unbreakable and being bulletproof, just fantastic. So then I moved on to the digital because it was time, and that Midas sound came with that digital console, and more than fantastic. I really like the way the console sounds, the EQ, the way their mic pre sound. Midas just make fantastic sounding consoles, and that's no detriment to anybody else. I did the sound for Led Zeppelin at the O2 Arena, 2007, I think it was 2008, and it's just a one-off concert. I'd like to do that one more time. Particularly, it's more of a technical angle. I actually think that I could do it better now. Because rehearsing for 5 weeks to do one show, and then you're suddenly thrown in the deep end. It normally takes, when you go on tour, it'll take you a few weeks to get everything to settle down, playing concerts, the band playing the same song the same way, you adjust things, and it eventually gets to be really comfortable. But it takes a few shows to get to that. So when you do a one-off show, just one gig, and you've got to make it all happen in that one gig, it's very difficult to just pull that out the hat. And I think we did okay, but I'd just like to do it one more time because I have a few other ideas I'd like to try. Listen. That's what I'm saying. Just listen. Take your eyes off the computer screens for a minute and actually sit back and listen to what you're doing. And listen closely, and your mix will get better. And that's about it, really. Listen. That's going to be my message for the next few years, is everybody's got to listen more closely. Stop taking things for granted and listen to what you're doing.